This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. During the age of social distancing, we're releasing extra episodes, so make sure to check in every day. Today's guest is Katie Crutchfield, a vocalist, guitarist, and songwriter who began recording original material as a teenager in her native Alabama. Katie's earliest collaborator is her twin sister, Allison, with whom she co-founded the band P.S. Eliot. Since 2012, Katie has released solo material under the Waxahatchee moniker. Waxahatchee's latest album, St. Cloud, was released in March to intense acclaim. Katie spoke to me from her home in Kansas City. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
How has your day been so far?
So far so good. Yeah, I'm in Kansas, and it's a beautiful Kansan spring day. So it's pretty nice. How about you?
Do you live in Kansas?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's a beautiful California spring day where I am.
Nice.
How is your life different during times of quarantine on a day-to-day basis than non-quarantine?
Well, I mean, I think the only real big difference is that I am not traveling. I mean, normally I would be my day-to-day life here, when I'm home is pretty much the exact same. I'm cooking a little more, obviously, not going to restaurants and things like that, but I don't really like go out a ton when I'm home, so it's pretty similar to this. The only big difference is that I'm not playing shows, I'm not traveling for pleasure. I'm kind of like a restless type of person that moves around a lot, normally, and so that's the only real change is that I'm not moving around.
Yeah, you just released an album about a month ago, St. Cloud. Did you have a tour scheduled for it?
Yeah, I was supposed to be on tour right now. So that's been a drag. But yeah, I was supposed to be on tour. I had a lot of touring planned for this year, and I was supposed to be on tour now, and it just keeps getting pushed further and further back. So that's kind of sad also to just be thinking about where I was supposed to be on any given day. And, I had taken a long break from touring. So my tour right now would have been my first tour in 15 months or something, which is a long time for me. So, yeah, I really miss it. It's kind of crazy to think that I was supposed to be playing live shows right now, given the reality of what I'm actually doing, which is like just the most kind of mundane activities.
Have you tried any live stream shows?
Yeah, so me and my partner, Kevin, we
Kevin
do,
Morby?
Kevin Morby, yes. We do a live stream every week on Thursdays. So we've been doing that a lot. It couldn't be more different, we're like just in our living room, like kind of doing things on the fly. And, live streams are so funny because it's people are talking, like your audience is talking to you while you're performing. But it has been like a nice, welcome kind of distraction or like thing that we can kind of count on every week. That's fun for us.
Let's go back in time.
Okay.
Were you born in Alabama?
I was born in Alabama, yes.
And you grew up near the Waxahatchee Creek, correct?
Yes. So I'm from Birmingham, and my parents have a house on Waxahatchee Creek. They've had it since I was a small child. And so, yeah, I grew up near the creek, and then the house so it's, I guess you would call it a vacation home. That really makes it sound fancy. It's kind of more like like half camping, half vacation home. It's like a cabiny type situation, but that is on Waxahachie Creek. So I sort of spent like a very large portion of my childhood and adolescence on the creek.
What's the earliest memory you can conjure up when you think back to being a child?
Um, I don't know. I have like little moments. I think that that's really all that I have. It's just like small, mundane moments. My parents both worked when we were really young, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I can kind of remember just like, like watching Ren and Stimpy, like as a child, like things like that. I remember like, my cousin had like a Michael Jordan poster. I remember that. I remember like little like glimpses of the 90s, I guess. Just like cool stuff that sort of like entered my consciousness. But I have very few like concrete like memories. I remember movies and music and little moments. But yeah, I think the youngest I could go back would be like 3 or 4. I remember this snowstorm because it doesn't ever snow in Alabama. I remember there was this really big snowstorm when I was 4 or 5, I think, and the power went out. My dad had to cook breakfast on the grill in our garage, and just like being so happy that it was snowing because it was so foreign to me. That's maybe my earliest memory.
You mentioned that your parents worked a lot when you were really young. What did they do?
They were both in insurance, and my dad is still an insurance man.
So, do you have good insurance?
Yeah, he makes sure of it.
I wonder if it was useful to have a dad that was in the business because it's so hard to navigate it as an individual.
Yeah, my dad's big specialty is bars and like restaurants. And so more than anything else, it's been cool. Like as I've gotten older and I've had lots of friends in Birmingham, start businesses and open bars and restaurants. I feel like I've always been able to kind of connect those groups of people to my dad. And so that's always been kind of nice to like help my friends that are starting businesses more than anything else.
So he helps them get liability insurance and then maybe helps them get insurance for their employees?
Yeah, I guess so. I never really asked the like the specifics, but I reckon that's what he does. Yeah.
My dad owned bars and restaurants when I was growing up, so I'm
Oh, cool. Where'd you
familiar
grow
with
up?
that world. In Milwaukee. And
Oh,
I went to the
nice.
same
Just like
high
Mike Kroll.
school as your soon-to-be brother-in-law. He was there after me with my brother, I think.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. You know
That's
who
so
else went
cool.
there is Spencer Tracy, the actor.
Really?
Yeah.
Jeez
And
Louise.
Jeremy Scahill, the political reporter. He's
Wow.
on Democracy Now! A lot.
Oh, cool.
Those are
Jeez.
the alumni I'm aware of.
Last night we FaceTime. We kind of do a bi-weekly FaceTime with Allison and Kroll, and um, last night Kevin and Mike both kind of went through their like high school uh, diaries and read us stuff from it. And Mike read lyrics from a song he'd written when he was in high school, and it was so good. It was so funny. I really hope he like puts it out into the world because it like made us laugh really hard.
When did you start playing music?
Um, I started playing music when I was, I guess about 13 would be 13, 14 was about the age that I started. And I got a guitar, I think for Christmas. And it all kind of stemmed from being, it's like kind of twofold. Like I was both just starting to kind of develop my own tastes in music. I'd grown up with a lot of country music. That was what my parents loved. And, kind of like oldies, 70s, sort of like Fleetwood Mac and that kind of thing.
And then what kind of country music were they listening to?
Kind of like everything. Like they were listening to like the classics. I really grew up with a lot of that, like Loretta Lynn, Tammy Wynette, George Jones, that kind of stuff. And then also like very much the contemporary pop country of the time, which was the 90s.
So Garth
Which
Brooks was huge and Brooks
oh
and Dunn and
yep,
people
Yep,
like
Alan
that.
Jackson, yeah, Trisha Yearwood, people like that. Just like
The
the big
Judds.
names. The oh yeah, the
I've
Judds,
gotten
the
to play
whole
with Winona a couple times, and she still got
wow.
it.
Oh yeah, she does still got it. Big time. I yeah, all that stuff was really, really big. And it's funny because I feel like pop country now is kind of like makes me kind of squeamish, but at the time, I mean, I still go back to some of that music. It's so Shania, it was just, it was a really big time for country. So that was the stuff that we really grew up with. But around age 13, 14, I started to get into more alternative music, I guess, like, uh, kind of like grunge and punk and like indie rock music of the time, which would have been like kind of like the Saddle Creek heyday, like Bright Eyes and Ryla Kiley and bands like that. Um, so as I started to get into that, I kind of had a desire to play music, and then I also, I was always in choir and like could sing pretty well, and really, it's like
In
one of those
church
things that
choir or school choir or
no,
both?
no, I didn't. We didn't go to church. No, not church. In school, it was like an elective. You had to pick. You either had to be in band or choir, or you could be in like you could do like a thing where you traded every month, where you were like in shop class and home ec and things like that. So I always picked choir because I liked singing. And then kind of through doing that, it just kind of slowly got reflected back to me that I like was pretty good at it. Like I would get solos and stuff like that, and so it kind of through getting better at that, and then also getting into like my own music. It's just one thing led to another, and I felt like, oh, I want to learn to play an instrument to kind of accompany myself. And I think in the very back of my head, I had thought like eventually I would really like to write my own songs.
When did you write your first song?
Um, so yeah, probably like a year into playing guitar. So I was like learning to play like whole songs on guitar and just real simple stuff. And I wish I could remember what the first song was about, but I kind of can't. There was like a batch of 10 or 12 songs that somewhere there's a tape of them that were my earliest, but probably around age, I would say probably right when I turned 15 was probably when I first started writing songs.
Did music feel like a hobby at the time, or was it more central to who you were as a person by then?
It was, yeah, it was like fully my identity at that point. Like it was like 100%. And it kind of went on that way up until I started doing music as my job, where I never really pictured it as like, I never really had strong career goals where I was like, I want to be, like rich and famous. Like that was never really my thing. But I had so much passion for it that I just was like, this is my whole life, and everything else, school, eventually like jobs, things like that. Everything else was kind of like second to that. And that was pretty much right out of the gate.
Did you know any professional musicians when you were growing up?
No, not at all. It's funny that you asked that because I feel like, now obviously YouTube exists and you can like learn how to do literally anything. But at the time, I had no examples of guitar players or musicians. So everything to do with playing guitar, I taught myself, and I kind of taught myself the like slow, hard way. So like even tuning or changing strings, that took me like a full year to learn how to do. Like it was just, I would break the E string on my guitar, the little E string, and just would leave it. I just wouldn't. I would just play a 5-string guitar for months until I finally learned how to change the strings.
Did you take lessons?
No, I taught myself.
But as far as singing, were you getting coached in the choir? Like, were you learning proper vocal technique or anything like that?
Not really. I'm like one of those people that it's 100% feeling. Like I just everything's by ear. And still to this day, like I still don't know the names of a lot of chords. Like if I look up how to play chords on in any given song, 9 times out of 10, I have to look something up because I don't really know how to play a lot of stuff. It's all kind of just ear and feeling.
Do you think that you would jeopardize your creative voice if you were to study in a more structured environment?
Not really. More than anything, I just feel like it's just not who I am. It's not who I am with anything. I feel like I'm not a studious person. I'm not like a person who just like crams for tests or or overly prepares for anything. So I kind of think, with music, it's gotten me this far to just do things the way that I do them. And I think like the things that I'm good at, don't super require that knowledge. And I luckily like now have friends and, collaborators and, creative associates who are good at all of that stuff that I don't really have to like know how to do any of that. The stuff that I do is so rooted in like instinct and feeling that I've never felt like that my lack of that knowledge has held me back.
When you were starting out and you were writing songs, did you like what you were writing at the time?
Yeah, I loved it. The first song that I wrote, I think I was a little. It just that one sort of like set me off. Like I think the first like song or two, I knew that they weren't great and that they probably would never be played for anybody, but it was something I needed to kind of do. It was like making pancakes and just sort of like I needed to like throw away the first pancake, but making the first one taught me how to make them.
Right,
And
and sometimes the first pancake tastes okay even though it looks ugly.
exactly, yes, it often I feel like, and so I'd made pancakes, on Sunday, and it's same. The first one, you can always pick out the first one. And that's very much how the songwriting process was for me. I sort of I kind of needed to get it out of the way, and then all of the early songs after that, I loved and felt really excited about.
You mentioned that you weren't ever super goal driven as far as being rich and famous, but did you have any sort of ambitions or dreams around music?
Like yes and no, but it's so interesting because I did, but sort of not. Like I looked up to people like PJ Harvey and Nico Case and Cat Power and like all of these indie rock women. I looked up to them and I wanted to be like them. But I didn't really think about it much beyond the creative successes. Like sort of like I'd love to make records. I love to like sign to a cool indie label like Matador or Sub Pop or one of those like cool indie labels and have them put out my records. And I just want to keep playing shows. And that was kind of where that those ambitions stopped. I didn't have the like I want to play this big theater and sell this many tickets and have like this or that. I didn't have any of those kinds of ambitions, but I had like which I only say because I feel like my early successes in music came as like surprise and were sort of like it was like a confusing it was confusing for me to navigate, and I think part of it was because I just never really dreamt about any of that for myself. It was really about
When you say
um
early successes, what do you mean by success? Like
I
popular
sort of
success?
yeah, like that kind of. I guess when I say success without a disclaimer, I usually sort of mean like in the traditional sort of like this
External
record was,
success.
yeah, totally. Like this was my breakthrough album, and this happened, and and all these like little like milestones happened. But I feel like, um, yeah, when I was really young like that, all I wanted was to just like be like my heroes, and my heroes were, those people that I just named.
Were you going to shows at the Bottle Tree at the time?
So at the beginning, so when I was like 15, that was pre-Bottle Tree. So there was a place called Cave Nine, that was like a DIY club, and like older people would play there, but it was frequented by mostly young people in like their teens and 20s. And it was sort of like a yeah, like a cool smorgasbord DIY venue. There was no bar, there was no nothing. It was just like a room with a stage and like a cheap sound system, and it was really all about music. And that's kind of where I started, and I started playing and started going to. And then Bottle Tree opened when I was 18. So I had already kind of been in the scene for like 3 or 4 years at that point. Um, but yeah, once it opened, it was definitely a place that we attended shows and played quite a bit.
What did you do after you graduated high school?
So right after high school, I went on tour with a band from Florida called Fake Problems. Chris Farron, if I don't know if you're familiar, your listeners are, but he's a musician. He used to be the front man of that band. And so they asked me to come on tour with them. We had met just because they'd played a lot of shows in Birmingham. And they asked me to come on tour and play mandolin and keys and sing backup and just be like an external, like, or a auxiliary, like, member of their band for this one tour. So, and they were kind of coming up. They had a booking agent and they kind of like, I had done a lot of DIY touring, but they were sort of they were just like a tiny little baby step toward like, kind of like pro touring, that closer to that than I was, at least. So I was like, oh, this is cool. This will be like a good learning experience. And, I'll make a little bit of money and I'll just like get to go and like learn how to be on tour more than I had. I was so eager to just tour all the time.
So you had already done some DIY touring when you were in high school?
Yeah. The first time that we did it, I was probably when I was about 16.
And was that with the band P.S. Eliot?
That was pre P.S. Eliot. So that was with the Acclaim, which was also with Allison, and
Your sister Allison. Yeah.
my sister Allison. Yeah. So that was then P.S. Eliot happened right after I got back from that tour with Fake Problems, like kind of right after high school.
Did you book all of your early tours yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I booked it all myself. And continued after this tour with Fake Problems. I continued to do that for a very long time with P.S. Eliot and with Waxahatchee, the first, little bit of Waxahatchee. So, yeah, I would. So MySpace was like the thing at the time. That was like how, musicians put their music online. And so really through that, I mean, how I would do it back in the day was I would like, see bands play in Birmingham, just on the DIY circuit. Like they would come to Cave Nine and, we would open for them a lot of the time, and make friends with a lot of them. And I would kind of like both make a mental note of, oh, this band's from Omaha or this band's from Tallahassee, or, I would just kind of like keep it in my head. And then when it came time for us to tour, I would kind of route a tour around those people. And I would hit them up and just tell them, hey, we want to play a show in your town. And then they would set it up. And the other way I would do it is those bands, I would look at their tour routes that were all posted on MySpace, and I would make notes of, DIY spaces like places like Cave Nine, like all ages clubs, and houses and different bands from different towns that they'd play with. I would just kind of like, if I wanted to play a show in like Phoenix, I would just sort of go online and look at the DIY, try to find out about the DIY scene in Phoenix. And if there was a club there or, a band there, then I would just write them.
That's funny. Yeah, that just came up today because somebody on Instagram posted a photo of Modified, the record shop in Phoenix. And I remember the first time I played in Phoenix, I called that record shop, and it turns out the woman that owns it, Kimber, booked a place called Modified, which was a DIY space there.
Wow. Yeah, see, it's crazy. I wonder, I mean, I'm a little like disconnected from it at this point, but I'm not sure if it's like as thriving, but back in the day, when I was doing it, like the DIY touring circuit was thriving, and it was like such an amazing experience to like get to tour that way.
I would agree. I mean, I'm glad that I don't do it anymore, but the first
Same.
several years that I was touring, that's how we did it. And I started in high school too. And I think back on how crazy it is that my parents let me get into a van that we bought for $700, that the exhaust was rigged up with bass strings, and go all the way across the country, during spring break. But on the other hand, I feel like it would have probably been worse if I wasn't doing that.
Yeah, I know.
Your parents must have been really supportive.
Yeah, they were. It's funny. I think that they had like my parents are pretty hands off. They always have been, and in a good way. Like I think that they knew, like they had the perspective to kind of pause and be like, well, if we don't like let them do this, they're gonna probably, they're gonna miss out on something. They're gonna resent that. They're, like that. They just didn't see the like how it would be helpful or like productive at all to like try and stop us from doing certain things even if they didn't 100% understand it. So they were always pretty cool about it. And we also like Allison and I together, like a combined force, like we would come in very hot and be like, this is the plan. We're doing this. We bought this. We were the exact same, or we bought this van for $900 and it's going to be fine. We have these shows. Like we would just kind of come in and like lay out this like big plan. And they would just be like, well, it seems like you guys just decided to do this. So we're, going to just let you free. Affection to criticize, monogamy to abhor, a cold heart and an altered state of mind. And baby, you're just what I'm looking for, 'cause we'll go to sleep when we're dead, and I'll quit when I'm 25, but now I'm feeling indestructible, aimlessly alive. I went to college technically for like a few semesters, but I went and it was so quickly like apparent that I was not supposed to be there. I would sort of like not go to class or not do my assignments, and all the while, I'd be writing this record and spending so much of my time and energy on it, just around the clock demoing and stuff. And that was all the early P.S. Eliot stuff. And it just became, I was really quick to just think, this is a waste of money and time. And I'm obviously, so focused on this other thing. Like I just might as well get a job and work here and there and then just focus solely on music. So yes, I did go to college, but it was a brief stint.
What were you doing to make a living before music was providing a living for you?
Yeah, a lot of things. I mean, the main job I had when I still lived in Alabama was I worked at a school. There's like a day school, a community day school there that's like a kind of like a liberal private school called Highlands, and I worked the after school program. So I was kind of like a
Did you go to that school too?
No, I didn't. I just they were hiring, and my best friend in Birmingham went there. And it was such a weird, perfect fit because it's Alabama, so it's there's a lot of right wing kind of politics there, and it was sort of like this like sweet little liberal haven for children in the middle of Birmingham. And I didn't realize at the time it was going to end up being like a perfect fit, and I worked there for a really long time.
What was the impetus to leave Alabama?
Yeah, it was just kind of time. I mean, so P.S. Eliot happened in the years between when I graduated high school and when I eventually moved to New York. And, a lot kind of happened in that time. Allison and I lived in Tuscaloosa briefly, which is in Alabama, where she was going to college. And that's kind of where we made the first P.S. Eliot album, and really any time where she and our other bandmates were not in college, like spring break, winter break, summer break, we were on the road. So, we were touring a lot and sort of slowly growing our fan base, like through the DIY touring. Like every time we tour or release something new, it would just get a little bit easier and a little bit more, there was a little bit more anticipation for it, and it was just sort of slowly growing. Allison, after our first album, and we came back from like a 3-month long summer tour with Hop Along, Allison decided to move to Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is where we had a lot of connections there, a lot of friends, and I moved back to Birmingham. So then we kind of kept the band going there for a while. Did another album, another EP and another album, and a lot more touring. And around that time, Allison started dating a guy, Kyle, who is from New York. And Allison just came to me one day, and right after we had made the second P.S. Eliot album, and just said, I think I'm going to move to New York. And I just kind of piggybacked on that. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go too. I'll come with you. And it was really just sort of like, I don't really know. I think we both knew deep down with we had never quite verbalized it, but I think we both sort of had this shared experience of like we love being from the South, we love Alabama, we love being close to our like we loved it, but we also just knew like we can't stay here forever. We have to leave. We maybe we'll come back someday, but we have to leave for a while. We were just both like hungry for that experience of living elsewhere. So yeah, we moved to New York.
How would you describe the creative dynamic between you and Allison?
Um, Now, with a little hindsight, because it's been sort of a while since Allison and I had a really close creative dynamic. I would say now in hindsight, the way I look at it is, um, we've always really made things for ourselves and for each other. Like we've almost just been like the person who gives the other one like permission to release something into the world.
So if you write a song that you're excited about, is she one of the first people you'll send it to?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And for years, I feel like that's shifted around. We've kind of like, I wouldn't say we've grown apart because I feel like we're closer than ever, but we've just sort of grown up a little and like kind of, we have like a lot of other people in our lives and a lot of, whatever. It's just kind of naturally happened. But for a long time, I feel like we really, um, she would be like kind of the only person I would send stuff to and the only voice I really heard. And same with her, like vice versa. I feel like it was just, you know, we were always kind of making stuff for each other. And as long as Allison liked something that I made, that's sort of like the only real validation I needed to feel good about it.
It also puts a lot of weight onto the relationship.
Definitely. And it did. It did. And I think, we definitely, it's definitely like a healthier dynamic now where I feel like she still is someone I send things too quickly, but I also sort of, I think I am able to kind of find that validation within myself now. But for a long time, that was the dynamic really is like she made things for me, I made things for her. And we just kind of had this insular sort of system.
Right. That's really interesting. It's like there's a fine line between, creative partnership and then codependence, right?
Deep codependency. Yeah, exactly.
Because, having somebody else as a sounding board can be really useful, but it can also allow us to kind of circumvent spending time feeling uncomfortable with ourselves, which is ultimately what we need to do to move forward sometimes creatively.
Yes, completely. Yeah, and I would say that that's definitely over the course of maybe a decade. Allison and I sort of processed and went through the highs and lows of that, and I feel like we're now on the other side of it, and we have like a healthy detachment from needing that validation from each other.
It probably makes sense then why certain siblings in rock and roll are so notoriously vitriolic towards each other. I mean, if you threw in
Oh yeah.
millions and millions of dollars, you can see how that would happen.
Oh yeah, 100%. I always like related to, like the Gallaghers. I'm just like, oh yeah, if a couple things had happened differently for me and Allison, like that could have very easily been us. It was like I think that we things happened for both of our careers. I feel like things happened at a very healthy pace. And so that was helpful. And I just think we've been able to kind of communicate and sort of deal with a lot of our stuff. But yeah, I think it definitely makes sense why things get super overwrought between siblings. It's a really unique relationship.
Earlier, you mentioned that for what you do well, you don't really need to be a studied musician. So I was wondering, when did you start to recognize what your strengths were creatively?
Pretty quickly. I mean, I think that it's funny when I think back now at like my songwriter self as like a 17-year-old. Um, it's not in some ways it's completely different, and other ways it's exactly the same as I am now. I think that quickly I had like pretty like strong influences early on. I was super influenced by you know like punk and the most simple punk music like the Ramones and things like that. And then the other big influence I think was Rilo Kiley, was Jenny Lewis. I've talked about her a lot, but I think she was like in my earliest days, that was sort of like a big influence on me. So I think like my earliest songwriting was really just me kind of mimicking those two things, like simple chord progressions and then like, kind of like heady, smart, well-read lyrics, and trying to find ways to do that. And obviously as like a teenager there were some big slips and missteps and things that were like just truly silly, but I think I felt like I found that voice quickly. It happened pretty naturally, pretty fast, because I was just sort of like very confident in what my influences were. But obviously, like, it took a long time for me to get to a place where I can, like, at a certain point, like there's music that of mine that I've written that I can listen to without cringing. Like that probably happened when I was maybe 22. About 22 is where I can go back and be like, okay, those songs forward are like still listenable to me, and anything before that, I know people like that stuff, but it's hard for me to go back to.
Do you ever cringe at work that's in progress?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
How do you know when to trust the cringe and when to push beyond it?
I leave things. I walk away from things. If I'm feeling unsure, and I will say that a lot of my songwriting now, I really think of myself as like an album maker. That's kind of how I work. I don't have the easiest time writing like standalone songs. They kind of everything has to be a piece of a larger picture for me. But my process now, I look at it as sort of there's like some creative nesting involved. I sort of have to like, kind of vision board what I'm doing, like have like a list and pictures of a lot of different things kind of happening, words and poems and writers and other musicians and moments of songs. Like I kind of like just put all of that stuff out there.
Do you literally make a vision board?
Not really, like kind of though. I mean, like I don't have like one vision board, but I have like notebooks full of notes and pictures, and I like have pictures sitting out, and I just kind of like creatively nest, both in my head and externally. And a part of that process is kind of like the first like handful of times I sit down to write lyrics for something, they're the worst lyrics you've ever read. They're just absolutely horrible. And that's just a part of the process. So those lyrics, I'm always like, this is throwaway. I know that. I have to get it out to get closer to whatever this is going to be. And so that's a big part of it for me. And with stuff kind of deeper in the songwriting process that I'm unsure of at first, I'll just let it sit. I'll write it down. I'll keep moving or I'll walk away, one or the other, but I'll let it sit and I'll come back in a day or two and see how I feel then.
It's interesting. Earlier, you mentioned that you think, you think in terms of making an album, and I wonder if that relieves some of the pressure from having to write the perfect song every time you're sitting down to write a song, because now it's really just there to service this larger idea.
Yeah, it does. I think so. I think I get really in my head about that kind of stuff. I get really in my head about when I'm making records. It takes me, the older I get, the longer it takes, because my expectations for myself just they get higher and higher.
Is that productive?
I don't know. I don't know if it is. I mean, I think so, because I feel like this record I just made is certainly my favorite record that I've ever made, and I think I went through so many different phases of being really hard on myself and of kind of laboring over every single word. And eventually, eventually I got there. Eventually I finished it. So I just kind of had to like trust the process. Um,
I'm going
so
to
on
play the
one,
contrarian for a second, though.
okay,
I mean, is
okay.
it your best record because you were harder on yourself than ever before, or because you have more experience writing songs than ever before, or both?
I think both, and I think that is kind of the that's kind of the result of all of it. I think that's my process with it has evolved to that, to being hard on myself, and then in knowing that that is how I am, I almost like trust it all a little bit more. I trust myself to not let anything that shouldn't be there stay there, and to know when something's finished and to know when something needs work. I just trust myself a lot more. But I think as I get older, it takes me longer to chip away. When I was young, when I was in P.S. Eliot and stuff, which I love those songs too, but I would sit down and just write a song in 2 hours and be done, and not overthink anything, and just like, kind of in like this perfect, like childish impatience, be like, whatever, that's it, that's the song. And um, that's kind of like the big difference in my process now, where I feel like it's more satisfying and productive and like fulfilling for me to really pour over things. And when I do that, the results are better.
I wake up feeling nothing, camouflage the wavering sky. I sit at my piano, wander the wild rib by. In the lilacs drank the water, in the lilacs died. In the lilacs drank the water, marking the slow, slow, slow passing of time. I get so angry, baby, at something you might say. I dream about an awful stranger, work my way through the day.
Can you talk a little bit about your decision to get sober?
Yeah. Well, you know, I started drinking when I was young. It was like in my first band, and that was just such a big part of the culture of music, and it still is, obviously. But it was, you know, they just went hand in hand, and it's like a story for a lot of people. Just when you're in high school and everybody's drinking and like, doing like light drugs, it's just kind of like a part of growing up. And that was obviously just like a really big part of my life as like a kind of alternative kid who just was like, really in the like nightlife sort of Birmingham, just playing music every night and whatever. So that was a big part of the culture for me, and it just continued through over the years. And it just is one of those things where like, kids drink a certain way when they're 19, 20, 21, 22. And it's like once you get to be 27, 28, and you're still doing that, I think it just something shifts for a lot of people. A lot of people are able to just like grow out of it. And I just wasn't one of those people. I was kind of just following me around for a long time. And I had thought about quitting for a long time. And I subconsciously knew that I would have to quit for a long time. And then I had tried to quit for a long time, and then something just clicked. I was on tour, and I had been going through phases of stopping drinking for X amount of time here and there, and then always going back to it. And in doing that, I had sort of started to slow down, and I wasn't really like drinking as much. And then at the beginning of a European tour in 2018, June 2018, I had like a couple of like bender, like basically like a 3-day bender of drinking, where like we were just drinking all day because we were at a festival, and just kind of everybody was just partying really hard. And at the end of that, I just woke up and was like, I'm done. This is causing so many problems for me. It's making me fight with my band. It's making me fight with my boyfriend. It's making me fight with everybody. It's making me like in every way, shape, or form, like the worst version of myself possible. And this is not how I want to see myself. And so I just kind of decided, and I told, my band, I was like, I'm not going to drink on this tour. And I told, my best friend and my boyfriend, I told everyone like, I'm going to slow down. I think I need to. And, everyone was very sort of politely and quietly like, yeah, that's probably for the best, and But I knew in my heart, even though I wasn't really saying it yet, I knew in my heart, I was like, I will never do that again. I'm done. I have to be done. I'm like something I've discovered about myself is I'm like a hard boundary person. Like I'm not a slower downer. Like I have to put those walls up, or with certain things, or, I will end up right back where I started. So anyways, yeah, that was kind of what led up to it. And, haven't had a drink since.
Did you get any help?
No, I didn't get any help. I mean, I had all kinds of help, like support and things like that, through friends, through all kinds of different avenues, but I did not like go to rehab or anything like that. I was kind of DIY'd.
I read in an article that you recently found an entry from your journal when you were 17, and even back then you had expressed a desire to stop drinking. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. That is right. It was so sad for me to read it because I knew, like, I have memories of being 25 and thinking like I have to stop drinking. But I had no idea it went all the way back to high school. I didn't remember that. And it's funny, I think about it now, and like I'm closer to that kind of like brutal honesty with myself. I'm closer to that now than I used to be. But now that in hindsight, I remember having that with myself, kind of very quietly. That just like that little like voice in the deep, deep, deep back of my head saying like, eventually you're gonna have to stop. Like eventually this can't keep happening. Because I think I identify as such a productive, kind of like clear-headed person. Like when
You can be
I'm like,
both, though, right? I mean,
well, wait, sorry. What do you mean?
you can be somebody who drinks a lot, and you can do it in such a way where you're segregating it to certain parts of the day and be super productive with the rest of your time.
Yeah, and I was that, certainly. And I think that like that, just looking back on, because I also am like, I wasn't like a drink all the time kind of a person. Like I didn't think that about myself. That wasn't me. So I certainly was somebody who was able to compartmentalize to a certain extent. But I got to a point where like I would be drinking so much at night that the next day I would be so hungover and I would be so depressed, and it was like really having strong effects on my mental health, and then that kind of had effects on my productivity, and it was just taking up so much space in my life. And I think I just started to like wonder, if I cut this out, will that clear a lot of that stuff up for me? And it really did.
Imagine that your journal from when you were 17 was magical, and you could write a message in it that the 17-year-old version of yourself would be able to read. What would you tell 17-year-old Katie?
Honestly, I feel so lucky in that like there are so many things about my life in this moment that 17-year-old me would be so happy about. So I feel like the drinking thing, obviously, I honestly think that if I told 17-year-old me that like, hey, when you're 29, you're going to get sober, I think 17-year-old me would actually probably be like, that sounds boring.
Or maybe she would say, okay, cool, I have 12 years to fuck around, and I know
Yeah.
that I'll...
And then I'm allowed 12 years of drinking, and
Yeah.
then I will have had enough. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that it would probably be somewhere in between those two reactions.
Would you ask 17-year-old version of yourself anything?
Wow. I don't know. It's so funny how I feel. I was just thinking about this morning because I was sort of like reflecting back on like a past relationship and just thinking about that. It's so weird to like think about the closeness you have with people, and then how that a couple decisions shift things around, and then suddenly you're like living a completely different life.
Yes.
And that happens so often. And I just am like, I was thinking about that this morning, and when I go all the way back to then, I'm just like, who was that? Who is that person? Like, what was I thinking about? What was important to me? What was, like what was I sad about? What was I happy about? It actually feels so far that it's hard for me to even know what to ask, because I do feel like it was just like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you didn't remember that you wanted to stop drinking when you were 17.
I know.
Which shows you that there was a whole inner world that you had at the time that, despite the continuity of your consciousness from then to now, you forget so much about who you were at any given time or what was on your mind.
Yeah, completely. I know. It's wild.
Earlier, you mentioned that you had an inner voice that told you to stop drinking. Is that voice instructive in the current moment? Is it telling you something positive or negative?
Yes and no. I mean, to me, what that voice is just like deep emotional honesty. It's sort of like, it's that voice that when something in the world like pisses you off and everything in your brain is telling you like, just smile through it. You're going to be okay. It's that voice that's like, no, I'm mad, So I think that that voice is always, I have to like learn how to work with that voice and learn how to like when to really listen to it and when to kind of tell it to chill and all of that stuff. So I think like, I think it's pointing me in different directions. It's pointing me, I think as far as like the deep, like self-care stuff, like not drinking goes, it's more or less kind of like in check at the moment. It's sort of like, you're doing okay. You could be probably like exercising a little bit more, or maybe like eating less candy, things like that. But for the most part, you're doing okay. I think that stuff feels like it's in check, but it is starting to kind of point me in different directions about, creative stuff, like next record stuff. Now that we're in this situation, with the pandemic, it's, everybody's kind of back to the drawing board. And, in a time where I was planning on being busier than I've ever been in my entire life, I now have nothing but time. So I'm starting to sort of go back to the drawing board and think, well, this might be a perfect time for me to start reflecting on what my next album will be and what that'll be about and who I'll work with and, what the songs will be like. And so I spoke earlier a little bit about like the album making process and how there's a lot of creative nesting involved. And so I'm kind of starting with that. Like I'm throwing some words together. I'm throwing some, just some songs and ideas and things like that. Kind of, I'm throwing it all out there and just kind of slowly starting that process.
Katie Crutchfield, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.